Hey guys, how's it going? Zan Barksdale with Catching-101. Have another episode of what we're calling Catching-101 TV. It didn't have a name before last episode, but I guess it dubbed the title Catching-101 TV. So excited for today's guest, Brett Thomas. He's a guy who I've kind of followed from afar for a while. I've had some interaction with him on social media, but I thought it'd be a great opportunity to get him on here and just talk catching and hopefully introduce him to some new people. So Brett, you're new to my audience and you're also kind of new to me. I'd love to have you just first kind of go through your background and kind of let everybody know who you are, where you came from, and also go ahead and let them know where they can find you online. That's one of the things I like to do. I don't want to wait till the end. I want people to know where to find you early. So go ahead and plug your social media accounts, your website, whatever you want. Let people kind of know your background.
Cool. Appreciate you having me. Number one, I always love getting a chance to talk some catching, but I'm located here, San Francisco Bay Area, born and raised here. Been fortunate that obviously had a passion for catching, but I've been fortunate to have some great influences that kind of led to where I am now. I played at a local junior college here, Diablo Valley College, and I always like to shout out my catching coaches. Tom Nillis was my catching coach there, who was a huge influence for me. And then I got the opportunity to go to Cal, and my catching coach there, Tony Arnrich, who's now the catching coordinator for the Mariners, has been a huge influence for me, and really kind of brought a little bit more of the why to catching rather than here's what we do. He really brought, why we do it. Really kind of expanded my brain on the passion of the position. So fortunate to work with him, and just got into coaching right after. I coached at Cal for a year, and I went up to Canada. I ran a high school program up there, and program here, College of San Mateo, and kind of led me to figuring out that I felt like I wanted to be a little bit more. You're good? Okay, sorry.
That's all right.
Felt like I wanted to be a little more grassroots, and really kind of do a little bit more development and preparing guys for the next level, as opposed to feeling like, I think we all as coaches have some ego, and we kind of got into it thinking I want to take somebody to Omaha, and, kind of looked at it from a different scope as you get older, and you're like, I kind of like the idea of preparing kids for that next level. So we came up with the Catching Academy, and we're fortunate to work with a bunch of catchers now out here.
Man, that's really cool, and I can definitely relate to you. For the people who maybe aren't familiar with it, as a college coach, if you had to, make a pie chart of how you spend your time, it seems like a lot of your time is spent on recruiting and the office work and the other side of stuff, and you get to spend less on the actual development. Even though you're practicing every day and you're on the field and you're with your guys, that's definitely probably, I hate to say it's not your number one priority a lot of times, but that's kind of what it feels like. And that's one thing I've enjoyed over the past couple of years is the main focus, just kind of being on the players and being on the work and getting guys better and working on the development. So I definitely appreciate that. And with your college background, I don't know if you feel the same way or.
Definitely. And in fact, actually, when I was coaching at Cal, it was 2009. I drove down to the ABCA convention, was down in San Diego, and I remember seeing you speak. You were at Louisville at the time, and I remember immediately thinking about how you were starting to think about things a little bit differently, even in that, and you really started to think about. I know you had like an app at the time, and,
Mm-hmm.
and really wanted to kind of quantify things. And I remember taking a bunch of that stuff back, and again, that was kind of where my brain started to wrap around the idea of like, I love catchers. And when I'm in college, like I get 3 or 4 of them. Like right now I get, 75 to 100 of them. And it's, the amount of influence that we can have is just so much greater on a position that I'm so passionate about. I love hitting. I love the game. I love competing. I love all that stuff, but it just pales in comparison to catching. So the idea of getting to affect, more than a handful of catchers is a blast.
Yeah, man, I know exactly what you mean. And that's actually something I kind of wanted to get into next. I definitely want to talk, catching specifics and mechanics and some of that sort of stuff. But I'd kind of like to know a little bit more about Catching Academy specifically. So you just mentioned, 7,500 catchers. I was on your social media sometime. I think maybe you posted a video on Twitter today of a catcher receiving kind of from an umpire view. And my eye kind of wandered after I watched it a couple times, and I'm looking in the background, I'm saying like, man, there's a bunch of dudes out there. Like you've got people with catcher's gear everywhere. So, man, tell me about the Catching Academy. I mean, what age guys do you work with? Is it a year-round program? Just I'd love to know again more about it.
Yeah, we started it. It's been about 5 years now, and we started it with the goal in mind of trying to get catchers, players in general to understand commitment to a development program. So you kind of see guys where they're like, hey, I got a tournament this weekend, I need a quick tune up. And it's like, well, that's not how this is done. We really want guys to come into a program. So we were actually like super anti camp. We really just wanted to get all classes. So we figured if we get classes, we run them like 6 to 8 kids and we make them sign up for 8, 12 weeks at a time. We know we're going to be able to progress, and we know we're going to be able to, it's just like any sort of curriculum. We teach something one week, we get to come the next week, start with review of what we did the week before, build on it. So it gives us a way to build a development program with kids. So we started doing that, and we had 10 or 12 classes on the Bay Area, and then we kind of started to mold as we really understood that kids are different and they learn differently, and some really wanted to do more one-on-one stuff, and we realized some kids learn better in that atmosphere, so we started doing some more one-on-one stuff. And then we do one camp a year, and that just kind of came about because we started getting some requests on Instagram from guys from out of the area that couldn't make it all the time. And then we're connected to so many great catching guys. We thought, even the guys that I work with on a regular basis, I want them to hear some other voices, hear some other things, get some different perspective on things that, A, I can learn from, but B, they might hear it a little differently from somebody else. It might click a little better. So even our camp where we get, 60 guys out there, so, half of them are probably working with us on a regular basis, but, we get Tony Arnich out there, John Baker, former big leaguer, is out there. We've got 5 or 6 guys that are in the minor leagues that are out there. This year we had freaking blanking on DNA catching. Help me out. Brian Watley
Watley,
was
yeah.
out there. Yeah, great guy. So we had so many great guys out there, and it was great because the minute we came back the next week working with the catchers I work with on a regular basis, I mean, they were, different verbiage came out. We started really getting into some in-depth conversations that I think really helped their development. So we've expanded, but we still really like the idea of getting guys to understand that it's a commitment. And even lessons, we tell guys right away, hey, we're not, we don't do just one-offs. We want you guys to commit to a process and, commit to seeing things through. And the first day we don't cover receiving, blocking, throwing, and, give you a whole overall. It's a very basic idea of receiving, and then we progress from there lesson to lesson. So really just, I'm really addicted to the process of the progression of how it's taught. So I think when we give them a why and an understanding of the ground level of hey, this is where we start and we build from there, we really just start to see them, progress so much faster.
Man, I agree with you 100%. I remember when I was coaching at Louisville, probably about the time, around the time you were speaking about a few minutes ago. I kind of did the same thing. We've all worked tons of camps and put on tons of camp, and we've done that. But I had, kind of a fall. I think it was a 6 or 8 week deal where the guys come once a week just because that's what I could fit into my schedule. And it was so much fun because you got to see the guys develop and grow, and you got to really understand their personality rather than just, hey, I'll see you for a 1 hour
Totally.
lesson. So I definitely believe in that style of atmosphere, especially when they're around, guys like I really like the info you putting out there, than the other guys they're around as well. You talked about Tony. I knew y'all had a relationship because I had seen y'all on the website together. And then also you've put out some really high quality videos on YouTube recently. Looks like a really cool series that's coming where you're interviewing a number of different, college coaches and pro guys, and you're kind of getting a really cool behind the scenes look. I'd love for you to kind of go into that. And the reason I bring it up is because you were with Tony in a few of those videos. So, man, why don't you go into
Yeah.
what you're doing on YouTube and kind of the stuff you got working?
Yeah, I mean, our idea behind that was, I think social media has been a huge positive in so many ways. I think maybe sometimes we kind of talk it down a little bit more than we should, but there is so much good stuff. I think we're fortunate in the catching world. There's not a whole lot back and forth as to who's right and who's wrong,
Mhm.
and opposed to a lot of other, disciplines within the sport. But there's also a lot of bad information out there, and there's a lot of stuff that we're fighting with. Spring season, they're with their little league coaches, their high school coaches, and we're kind of constantly fighting some battles as the players come back. Their coaches are giving them some information that's not always correct, and not to their fault. It's just what they know. Um, and we wanted a database for guys to get resources that came straight from the source. So it wasn't me saying, hey, Tony Arnrich was talking to me about X, Y, and Z. It's Tony working with his guys, talking about what he's talking about. And it's Marcus Simeon, talking about what he finds in the keys for him to being successful. We've got a handful of other big leaguers that are going to be on there, catching coordinators, just anybody that was just willing to give us the time to really hear what's making them successful and hear it directly from them, straight from the source, and not try to get the secondhand Twitter of what people think might be important, might not. Again, I think there's a lot of positive. I'm not trying to be negative about social media, but I do think that we just really focus the idea of how do we get information straight from the source to these guys, so they're impacted, right? They're not having to process it. They're going, well, if Marcus Simeon says that his game reps in spring are the most important thing to him, well then maybe that makes one kid go, you know what, I'm going to stop thinking that inter squads suck,
Yeah.
and I'm going to start to really understand the value of those repetitions. And we got Stephen Piscotty on there, and he does a great job talking about intention, and how he works. And I'm like, that's something that a kid needs to hear, not just the, hey, are you working hard, posting a video of yourself, throwing some weights around on social media, or are you there with intent to get better? And hearing a big leaguer say it obviously has a little more weight than some of us. But I'll tell you what, I mean, personally, I learned a lot, but I had a blast doing it. I mean, we went down to spring training and got a chance to talk to all these guys. And luckily, we went down the first week of spring training because it pretty much got shut down after that. But it was a blast, and I mean, I'm super pumped about it. It came out so great. I'll plug my videographer, Sawyer Gieske. I mean, he's just incredible. He actually played baseball at U of A, so he has a baseball mind, but yet an incredible vision for it all, and has really done a great job putting it together. So yeah, we're on YouTube, the Catching Academy Network, if you want to check us out there.
Yeah, super high quality videos, and I don't know what your plans are for the future, but I definitely, yeah, I know spring training right now is was a wash, and the season's up in the air right now. But I hope you continue to put out stuff like that because that's really cool to see. And obviously, you've got some good contacts that let you behind the scenes, and it's kind of neat for people
Definitely, we
to.
got to get you on there.
Man, shoot, I'd love to. Anytime we can. Well, and
That'd
that's
be
why I'm
awesome.
doing stuff like this. I've never really, had a show or done one of these things before, but I think it's just cool to connect with people, and that's one of the things that I want to do here. Is, there's a number of guys like you who I know are out there, and I know you exist, and I know you're teaching good information, but our paths just haven't crossed to where, we really run in the same circles all the time because I'm on the East Coast and you're on the West Coast. And it's just a good way for catching guys to kind of get together, connect, and kind of grow the brotherhood. But yeah, so
Definitely.
but definitely cool stuff you got going on. Like I said, I'm really enjoying watching those videos. I do want to ask you kind of about like if I had to get your elevator pitch for what your system is at the Catching Academy. If I'm a prospective parent and I know my son has aspirations to play college baseball, and they're trying to figure out, what can get him from where he is now to where he wants to go. And they decide, hey, I found out this guy at the Catching Academy. What's his deal? What's he all about? What would be the elevator pitch? What would you tell a parent? When their son comes work with you, what's kind of the process?
I think first and foremost, again, I'm kind of a broken record here, but it's getting them to understand process, and just being process oriented. And that's really the first case of, hey, we're not, this position is really hard. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. It's really difficult. So if we don't buy into a process in terms of how I'm going to develop and continue to develop, I just don't stand a chance. So my first pitch is really getting them to understand a commitment to it. You know, you need to come and make a commitment to, you know, yourself and bettering yourself. But as it kind of moves to the physical aspect of what we're doing catching wise, um, you know, we're trying to build confidence through creating strength of what we do. And that's, you know, we basically like kind of throw out the idea of in the beginning of what's our philosophy or what we're really trying to do, and just understand physical strength and the idea of what allows us to basically manipulate the ball and not allow the ball to manipulate us. And that's the first thing that we can ever teach a kid, regardless. I mean, you know, I think it's great. I love how the game is shifting towards such an exaggeration on receiving, because that's the way I've always been. You know, Tony was always that way. You know, huge on receiving, and we totally bought in. And you know, ever since then, I've been dedicated to that. And I have a tweet ingrained in my mind from Rob Smith, the head coach at Ohio. It was like probably in like 2014 or something. I have a screenshot of it. And he tallied up his chances of his catchers. He said, "Hey, my catchers had 5,000 chances this year. 88% of the time they received, 10% of the time they blocked, 2% of the time they threw." I thought, what are we doing here? Like I'm coaching in college at the time, and I'm going to a showcase, and all I'm seeing is a kid throw down 3 balls, and that's it, right? And then even when he's catching a coach pitch game, and then you might get to watch him catch bullpens. And so we really want to emphasize the idea of receiving, and you know, tell kids, hey, commit to, if you're doing the class, all our classes are 12 weeks. You're going to get a ton in terms of that, and we're going to be able to slowly progress. But even when in lessons, I like to get guys to at least commit to 5 lessons so that we know we can progress. And even by the, you know, 4th lesson, we might not have touched, you know, blocking yet, because we're so ingrained in understanding receiving and understanding strength, understanding the way that we attack the baseball, which then is so important to how we transfer the baseball, which is obviously important to how our upper body control is, to where our feet can go, which allows us to be consistent with our throwing. So I think it's just like anything else. We tell a kid at 8 years old, when we start to hit, we talk about, you know, bending his knees and getting his hands into a good position to start, feeling athletic, feeling fluid. Those are all the same things we start with catching. And one reason I love catching at the younger levels is that I really just want to start at the bottom. You know, I mean, I get guys even still to this day that are in college, you know, and it's still starting square one. We obviously move faster, but we've got to start with that base of the terminology and the understanding of what we're trying to accomplish in terms of just providing strength to the baseball. And then that obviously we can springboard from there, but that's a difficult thing to establish. Obviously easier, not easy, but easier at the older levels, and more difficult at younger levels. So it takes some time to just build that. And once they kind of feel that, they immediately become better catchers, whether we've covered anything else, because they're just more confident. They just feel more confident. They're back there with more confidence. And realistically, that's, as we try to develop physical skills, confidence comes with that. So that mental aspect, we're teaching that with the idea of mechanics. Mechanics can create confidence for guys. And so at the younger ages, we see, you know, insane growth in just a couple lessons, because guys just feel more comfortable back there.
Yeah, man. So, well, a lot of good information there to unpack. I kind of want to go back and talk about a couple things you mentioned. I'm an
Mm-hmm.
absolute believer in what you said. Is, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a high school guy, middle school guy, college guy, whatever. You have to start with the foundation. Just like you have a tweet from 2014 ingrained in your mind. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
2009. I went down to spring training and spent some time with the Cardinals, and I've forgotten his name. I feel terrible. The first base coach. We were speaking to him, and he said, "We have to treat these guys in spring training like they've never played the game before." And these are big leaguers. He's in big league camp, big league first base coach, and
Yeah.
he's talking to these guys. He's teaching them. He's coaching them the foundations, the basics. You know, it's not extremely, you know, complicated at the big league level and simple at the high school level. It's the same game of baseball. It's just played a little bit faster, like you said. So I think that's important, man. I think building a foundation at any age, anytime you start working with the guys, is important. Going back to something you said even before that, something that I've said for a long time, and you're right. There is a lot of information out there. I think it's getting to be where there's a lot more better information now. I think there's guys, like you said, social media. I'm a firm believer that it's a good thing. Obviously, it depends how you use it, and there's different crowds, and you get a lot of different personalities.
Totally.
But people like you sharing info, people like Watley, who you mentioned earlier, sharing info, and kind of the guys in the Catching Brotherhood. There's a lot more good information out there, but you do still have to decipher the good information from the bad information. And I would say that's changed over the past couple of years, which brings me to my third point, which ties into the third point. We talked about receiving and, how being a college coach and going to showcases, you used to just watch guys throw down. I think for the longest time, catching coaches would always say that receiving was the most important. But I think now it's actually, people are walking the walk behind it. They're not just, talking the talk. People are actually valuing catchers who are better receivers. And I think that started because the big league level and, the hardware systems like Hawkeye and TrackMan that allow us to actually, quantitatively look at these guys and evaluate them. But I think it's an interesting shift that I think we're getting more into. So with everything kind of changing, kind of circling back around, what would you say is your receiving style? I know you said that's important to you, and it seems like that from the videos I've watched. But there's a lot of different ways guys teach it, and I think there's more than one way to teach it correctly. I think a lot of guys have individual tendencies, and everybody's anatomy is slightly different, so there's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak. But when it comes to receiving, the hot thing right now is, one knee down or not one knee down, or it's, you talked about manipulating the ball versus a couple of years ago, we tried to stick the ball. If you just kind of wanted to give me the 10,000 foot view of your receiving philosophy, I'd kind of love to hear what you guys teach and what you believe in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of ties back into the strength, and we really want guys in their receiving techniques to evolve naturally. If we're teaching them positions of strength, we're teaching them about angles, we're teaching them about how we want to manipulate our pocket. Their styles are going to kind of come naturally, and we don't really have to, teach a whole lot. We might do some drills that we're just kind of you know, subliminally kind of talking about, some things. But the reality is we want it to be pretty natural as to what fits for them. So the first thing we always talk about is just points of strength for us are number one, working underneath the baseball. We all know that. Gravity is pulling the ball down. It's going down. We got to counteract it to be able to have control of it. Obviously, if I'm coming above it, it's pulling us down. So that's the number one thing. We talk about the relationship with our elbow and our wrist. So, I mean, if we think about a push-up, this is going to be our strongest position to do a push-up. We're going to have to work into other positions, but understanding where the strongest point is really important, and understanding how we might have to work from a weak point back to that strong point. So understanding that relationship. And then I am huge on guys feeling the ball coming close to them. And that's one thing I do get a lot of pushback on in social media for me is everybody has a different feel for them in terms of what feels close. Until they really start to feel what depth is, they don't know how to work away from their body. So I always talk about how catching kind of was, 20, 25 years ago pegged as something different, but it's really the same. And I tell people all the time, really, we're thinking like infielders. We have to be in strong positions with our pocket to be able to get to the ball. And an infielder is going to work, from down to up, and they're going to work close, in to out. So it's the same thing. They might start in and pick a ball right, in front of their face, easy short hop, but they also are going to start in, and then it's going to have them work through a ball where they make contact maybe 12, 18 inches in front of them. And it's the same thing. If I'm always away from my body, it's really difficult to manipulate myself back in a strong position. Whereas I understand what's close. It's easy for me to wait, and then go out if I need to go out and get it. But it's kind of like that idea of extension to flexion or flexion to extension. I really only teach flexion to extension. And the only reason is because I think extension to flexion is a natural thing. So if they understand flexion to extension and where their pocket is to be able to get through it, well, some guys who have much better wrist flexibility, have a much better feel, are going to get out a little further, and their body's going to naturally bring that closer to their body because they're away. So I think, we do drill. Tony used to do it with us in college, where we put a ball under an armpit and have them catch balls there and have to, keep that thing in there, where number one, it forces that elbow below the wrist relationship that we're talking about. And number two, that ball gets to them and they are blown up even when they catch it, where they go like, holy crap, that's deep. I didn't know that. Because to them, I'd say, hey, catch it deep. And they still got 8 inches from their chest to the ball. Mm-hmm. And I think just from being able to understand that point, if I can say, hey, I think it's similar to hitting. Hey, I'm going to let this thing get as deep as I can. And then, oh, it's a fastball middle, whack, I can go out and get it. But if I'm really trying to go out and get everything from a hitting perspective, I have no adjustment on the breaking pitch, the off-speed pitch, to be able to work to the back half of my swing. So it's the same deal. So those are really the 3 points that we start every lesson with. And from there, again, our philosophy is more, present the pitch, in a way that the umpire likes it. And I think that's, there's not always one answer to that. Again, each guy's different. I think that, a lot of times we don't talk about wrist flexibility enough. Some guys are going to have to catch the ball deeper because they can't keep the pocket open and keep that wrist flex. So they really need to understand that feel and understand what it looks like from their strong position to work through it so that umpire gets a good look. So again, it all kind of evolves naturally once they figure out where their personal strength points are. That philosophy kind of, comes natural, but we want them to have as many tricks in their bag as they can. And I think, Tony said it great at the camp last year. He asked everybody, he's like, hey, who likes country music here? And everybody's like, no, nobody. A bunch of high school kids are like, we don't like country music, And he's like, all right, who likes hip hop? And they're all like, yeah, I like hip hop. And then Tony's like, well, that's cool, but guess what? The umpire likes country. So what are you going to play today? You're going to play country. Yeah. So again, you might not be able to receive exactly how you want every single day, but you really got to find a way to have enough tricks in your bag that, hey, we know how to stick it and hold it and just catch it right where it's at. And realistically, I want most of the guys to kind of start their day that way, of being simple and understanding the value of that. And, if we start to get pitches, all right, let's stay with that. And then if we start to see we're not, let's manipulate a little more. Let's work it a little bit more. But I think it's just like anything else. We really can't have one certain way or really one certain philosophy, other than we're really trying to have, as many arrows in our quiver to make sure that we're helping that pitcher get as many strikes that we need that day.
I think that's a good way to put it, man. I think it's, for me, I think too many guys right now are trying to fit in the same mold. They see one guy they see a real Muto, he's doing like this. He's catching this way. I got to catch that way. I got to catch like this. And I think it's very individualized. You know what I mean? Like you said, it's very similar to hitting. A lot of similar thoughts and ideas there, and similar coaching styles where, there's certain things that the best guys do, but there's also a lot of flexibility in there as well. And I definitely see that. I really like what you mentioned about, like, the wrist flexibility. So let's say I have poor wrist flexibility and you notice that and you say I'm having an issue because of it. Do you have any particular drills or anything that you do with that? Because I'll be honest, I've focused heavily on hip and ankle mobility. I haven't worked as much with the wrist. So, I mean, that's something that I'm kind of learning from you that I like to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, obviously the closer we get it, the easier it is to have the pocket open. So getting them to understand depth, that's really where some of the one knee stances and things like that come in handy, because we're not fighting our lower body to be able to be a little deeper and still get our pocket square. But a lot of times it's really just how they hold the glove. A lot of kids just, they really want to get their hand jammed up in there. And when my hand's jammed up in there, it's really impossible for me to get that thing up. So we want them to understand that, if they can pop their thumb out a little bit, it really gives them more flexibility here. And, Tony used to always talk to us about, taking these two strings. And if you have, I always like to just press it in against, and I never really had an issue with it, but some guys do. And if you take the two strings out here, pull them out, you can take some scissors. And I always tell guys, do it very little by little, because you can't go backwards on it. But if you start to just cut that, you got the two laces, kind of like a V. And if you start to cut that just little by little, you're going to be able to pull those strings a little bit further out, and you're basically going to just kind of get a tighter pocket that sits on that thumb. So it allows you to feel like you're in your glove a little bit more, but with your thumb out, now you really can create a lot more flexibility, and you can really get that pocket square a little bit more. So we'll always start with that to help them kind of feel where they are in their glove. But again, it's really depth. Wrist flexibility is depth. I've got, the kid that I posted today, he's a freshman. I got him when he was 12, and it was like he could go fully extended and his pocket be square up. And, we don't talk a whole lot with him, about letting it get deep or anything like that, because, he's got a really good feel for that. But some guys I get that like literally can barely move their wrist. And we really got to get them to A, understand where they are in their glove, B, letting it get deep, which keeps our pocket open, and C, feeling comfortable with your elbow back. And that's one thing that a lot of guys kind of struggle with, is they really want to be out here and they kind of want to feel their elbow in front of their body. But realistically, I'm, just as strong when my elbow is back and closer to my body. And then again, they've got to be a little different. So if they, in order to square the pocket up on a low pitch down and out, they have to be closer to their body. Then they got to understand the move to push it out a little bit to make sure that they're giving that umpire a good view, because we do want to catch it deep for the sake of pocket awareness and then being strong. But we also got to get that thing to a position where our umpire can see it, and, he benefits from it as well.
I like that, man. That's really good stuff with the glove. Let me ask you this. So I'm with you. For me, I personally think it's easier to get a player to feel flexion to extension than it is the other way around. If we're talking about a ball just right down Broadway, right down the middle, pitcher throws a strike, first pitch of the game, how deep would you generally want him to catch that? You like guys catching it deeper? It seems like I understand. I'm not talking about guys that are trying to manipulate it, not a ball that's maybe a couple inches at the bottom of the zone, but just a pitch right down the middle. How close do you like him to keep that elbow? How deep would you say? Is there a guideline?
No, I think it just goes back to kind of the case by case sort of a deal. I think every guy is going to feel more comfortable at a certain depth, but for me, that certain depth is going to create the ability to have that glove flat. So, if we don't want any movement, if we want it to just be, hey, catch and stick, if I get out, again, the further away I get, the glove has to start to hood a little bit. So if I do get too far out there and I'm a little hooded, I might catch it here, which I know some guys like, and it's not that big a deal. For me, though, I know I'm not strong if I'm on the top of the baseball. Here, when they have a flat glove, I always tell guys when I'm feeding them, I'm like, let me see the ball, so I know that your thumb is underneath and you have strength there. And I think there's a definite appearance factor to that too. So if we're showing, this glove turned, well, that's really the umpire seeing this view, which is just a really narrow
Correct.
view. They're seeing a ton of background behind them, right? And when you flatten it out, obviously you take some of that background out, you really reinforce it in their face. And again, we can make a lot of lower pitches seem more elevated by doing that. So again, I think whatever achieves that position for each individual guy is going to be different. But again, I don't want guys to really catch the ball, against their body every time. I just think it's super important that they understand what that feels like. To me, it's kind of like that, BP, where every big leaguer you see just goes, ground ball, opposite hole, ground ball, opposite hole. They're just kind of feeling their barrel and they're feeling it a little bit deeper. And then they start to progress to where they go middle and pull. It's the same thing when we just start our drills. Hey, let's feel it in here as a warm up, even just like letting the ball hit the pocket. Don't even squeeze it. Let's just feel strength with that. Let's hear the sound that we want to hear. And then from there, again, each guy's different in terms of where they move from there. But I think feeling that is the most important thing, more than, really catching it that deep.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. Like I said, I like that. I I like what you're saying, because it's a lot of what I believe, and everybody likes hearing, things that are affirming what they
Yeah,
already believe. But you're saying some things in a different way than I say it, which I think is very beneficial. It's I like some teaching cue. I'm gonna steal some of your teaching cues. I like some of that stuff. Let me ask you this. So, we're talking about receiving right now. What the guys are doing at the big league level, the way they're manipulating the baseball, and the clips we see of those guys online. Do you feel like those are the same methods that the younger guys should be learning, or do you think there's a progression where, hey, if I come start seeing you when I'm 12, 13, 14, I've got to have step A kind of before I get to step B. I feel like right now a lot of guys are kind of trying to skip the initial stages, and they're kind of trying to get right into the crazy manipulations, I guess. I don't know if you feel the same way or not, but what do you
100%.
think? What do you think? So, what do you think is a good, foundation receiving wise, but before they're able to move into those progressions, and then maybe what are some of those progressions, if that makes sense?
No, totally. And I think the biggest thing with that is that if we are trying to move through the ball, we can kind of convince ourselves that we're in stronger positions than we are.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm trying to move through the ball, well, there's times I can be over it, catch it here, and move it, and feel like that's the right move when it's not all the time. So it's the idea of the first step is, we do just let the ball hit the pocket, don't even squeeze the glove right where it's at. And again, are you in a strong position where the ball's hitting and even sticking and staying in there? Or are you in a position where you're over the top, ball's kicking out this way? Maybe the ball's just bouncing out super hard, so we're a little too aggressive going to get it. But I mean, we're always going to start with the idea of I just want to see you catch it and stick it right where it's at so that I know you had control over it. So if you have control over it, just catching it and holding it, well, now I know you can get to a position where you might be able to manipulate it and move it a little bit more. But I'm with you on the idea of, hey, first things first, we got to catch this thing with some strength right where it's at. From there, we can start to think about how we move it. And then from there, it's really more understanding angles to be able to move through it. So again, I don't, you know, it's really more, I want guys moving a little bit more through, a right-handed slider because that's, the angle that it's coming in. We can move it back to the plate and it's a little bit easier to move that way. But, there's a lot to be said for the idea of, if I catch and stick the ball right where it is with very little movement and it's a ball that's right on the black, my pitcher's painting that day, umpire's giving it to me, I can kind of start to progress and expand the plate by just catching it that way,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's off the plate. So I think, again, the step one is understanding that strength and just catching it where it is and really letting that be your first process of how you go through your receiving for a day. And, you know, I know that I thought, Ryan Cianco had a great tweet the other day talking about how every pitch in that moment, is a important pitch. But I also do believe that there's a setup to how you want things to go that day. And I think that, if we can set them up by saying, hey, you know, even when you interact with the umpire, introducing yourself, hey, I'm Brett, great to meet you. Hey, I just want to let you know, I'm really not going to move a whole lot back here. I really just want to, let you see where it is, and you decide if it's a ball or a strike. And, if immediately, I'm going to ask him, hey, just let me know if you can't see anything. That's number one. And then number two, just, you know, it's all you. I'm just trying to present it to you today. And immediately his brain kind of shifts to like, sweet, I'm not dealing with this kid trying to make every single pitch a strike, stick in
Mm-hmm.
every pitch where, puts him in a position where he's got to call a bunch of pitches balls where the catcher's holding it for a second and a half, 2 seconds. But I think, I think that's kind of what you're talking about in terms of like just step one. I'm still a very firm believer in that. We do a lot of drills like you saw today where balls are off the plate and we want guys to see if they can get to this side of it and finish on this side of it with the ball just kind of getting in the way of that mechanic. And sometimes obviously that's going to work for us, but there's just got to be again, I know I'm a broken record here, but there's just got to be multiple tricks in our bag. There's just got to be more, and I think it has to start with square one of, do I catch it and stick it right where it is with some
Yeah.
strength, and then moving from there.
Well,
Does that answer your question?
absolutely. And honestly, that's the way I feel too. But I feel like a lot of people, I don't know if a lot of people necessarily feel differently, but I feel like that's something that's getting overlooked. You know, I wrote a book, 10 years ago now, and I talk about being able to control the baseball. And I get emails from parents that, they buy the book, or maybe it's a coach that bought the book, and they're saying, Coach Zan, I see you wrote this about controlling the baseball. Like, does that still apply today? Now I see guys trying to move the ball, manipulate the ball. And I personally think that does still apply. I think that's kind of step one. I think you shouldn't be working on manipulating the ball if you can't control it. I think learning how to control it is step one. And then beyond that, let's learn how to manipulate it past that. But I feel like a lot of people kind of, they want to gloss over that, and they want to get to the sexy part, because let's be real, it looks sexy when you got a ton of glove movement. I think every catcher, there's some part of them that wants to be a middle infielder. You want to be smooth and you want to look pretty, but maybe we just don't have the athleticism. I know if I could have played any other position, I always wanted to be a second baseman, man. I always thought double plays look cool, and those guys in the middle were smooth,
Totally.
So I think
Coach used to kick me out in BP, be like, Thomas, get off the infield.
Yeah. Yeah, go. So I get it. Like, I understand why guys want to do that, but I still think it's part of the progression, And so
Totally.
the younger
I'm 100%
guys.
agreement.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to hear, because I feel like I'm on my own with that sometimes. But
I think, again, it's what, like we talked about in terms of kind of how social media is perceived too. It's like, guys will write on the post today and say, oh, that's way too much movement. It's like, okay, but like, again, I've had this kid for 3-4 years. So this isn't like, day one, we just immediately went into this move. We spent a lot of time laying groundwork for him to then really feel these moves and have an understanding for them. So there's a story behind everything. That's why I don't really like get into, much in terms of that on social media. I definitely see things and I'm like, might not agree with, but I'm not going to go out of my way to comment or anything, because the reality is I don't know, where that guy is in his process. I don't know what stage he's at. And I think that's why I have a really difficult time if somebody says, hey, can you do a quick 10-minute thing on receiving? It's like, no, I can't. I don't know how to do that because, there's just such a big process to this that I can't. And I spoke at a USA clinic this year, and, they're like, hey, you have an hour, so cover as much as you can. And I was like, I'm just letting you know, like, the only thing I'm going to cover is receiving, because, an hour is a perfect amount of time for me to kind of give you a real idea of my overall, philosophies on receiving. And I think that's where it, again, becomes difficult in today's day and age, where everybody wants that, 30-second clip that gives them all the answers, and they want hey, what's the quick fix and everything. And it's like, there is none. There's a process to it all. And everything you see, guys are in different, parts of their process. And it's just like hitting. We get kids that are talking about launch angle and things like that. And it's like, well, these guys are big leaguers that have hit, 600 at every level.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got to the highest level and they started to use analytics to kind of take that to a different level. It's like, hit 600 in high school. And then we'll start to figure out, how do we adjust with our launch angle and how we do this?
Yeah.
Because if you're a 200 hitter in high school, trying to get a bunch of analytics and things like that into your swing, like, that's where you need to go 100% to the basics of what gets you into strong places, what gets you into consistent places. And then we move from there to say, okay, great job. You hit 400 this year. What's next? And there's too much of that straight into the analytics of a lot of this stuff, or seeing the best do it and thinking that they can just, emulate that.
Yeah, man, it's definitely a process. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, and baseball is baseball, and it's not much different at the big league level as it is at the high school level and college level. But there are some differences. I mean, the athletes are different, which brings me to one of the things that I get asked a fair amount about, and I'd love to kind of hear your opinion on it. So if we want to call them tricks or techniques, the big league guys are using, the ones we're talking about, do you think, and I say that broadly, manipulating the ball, moving, working under, that type of stuff, do you think that's as useful at the lower levels as it is at the big league levels? Or do you think there's maybe an age where, hey, let's just hold off on that now, or do you think it's just more individual progression? What do you kind of think about that?
I honestly think that it is more advantageous at the younger levels because umpires are not as trained or as good, that you kind of have a little bit more of an idea of how to fool them with some of that stuff. But that being said, I don't think that's as advantageous for the player's development to always be doing that. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of just goes back to the idea that, like, the 12-year-old pitcher that can throw a breaking ball for a strike is going to throw 60% breaking balls because no 12-year-old kid can hit a breaking ball.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what's best for that player's development, for him to throw 60% crappy breaking balls because it's a strike.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the same thing here. I do think that a lot of movement, umpires at the younger levels, again, they're not as trained. They don't really know exactly what to look for. They're kind of a little more, foolable, if you will. So I do think it can help from a standpoint of getting more strikes. But again, I don't always want guys going out there with that approach when they're
Yeah.
not, at a certain level that they can do it. So I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword. I do think that guys will probably get more strikes that way at the younger levels. But I also don't know if that's the best situation for them when they can't be patient with their target down and wait to work through a ball, when they really are getting a little more defensive and they're getting a little more extended and weak and pulling more balls rather than working through balls. But again, the results might be right, which in this game can obviously be very difficult to kind of figure out what's a good result and what's a bad result, in a sense.
Yeah, that's one of the areas that I would say my mind still goes back and forth on. Like there's some days I agree with you, and there's some days that I think it's less advantageous at the younger levels, and only for the same reason you mentioned, and I don't think it's a knock on the umpires. I know you watched your wording and you're trying to be respectful, and I get it, but I mean we have to be honest. Like the players, the big league level are the best players. The coaches, the most part of the best players. The umpires are the best umpires. So they're a little bit probably not quite as good in the minor leagues. Probably not quite as good. Maybe at some levels of college. Again, you can debate which is where. And then when you get to high school and lower, that's just how it works. The lower levels, the quality of
Mm-hmm.
play is not as good. The quality of coaching is not as good. The quality of umpiring is not, so I don't think it's a knock on anybody. It's just that's why guys continue, up the ladder, because they continue to get better and better. But my argument, if I would call it an argument, is, at the ages where you don't have the hardware, you don't have the Hawkeye system or the TrackMan system to really be able to evaluate how well it's working. I just don't know. I think it's just hard. You can't really measure it. So if I'm a high school kid and I say, hey, I'm trying to work under the ball today, I just think after the game's over, they don't know, okay, I got this ball. The umpire wasn't going to call it a strike, or I booted this ball and I boxed it and I made it look worse, because there's not as much video. There's no historical data like there is in the MLB. So like I said, I don't know if I'm not saying I disagree. I go back and forth. I don't know. I think at the big league level, it's easier because it can be measured. I mean, it can be measured.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the game's over, there is a report you're looking at that says, hey, today your score was minus 2.1, and these
Yep.
are how many strikes, and you don't have that sort of feedback at the lower levels. So I think sometimes they try to do things and they think they're doing the right thing, but maybe they're not. But you just don't know. It's a tricky topic. I would never tell somebody not to work on it, because I think you always have to, dress for the job you want, so to speak. But it's just tricky. It's kind of a tough one that I don't know if there is a.
And I think at the younger levels, the only data you really have is that you might have got a pitch this far off the plate for a strike,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas like in the big leagues, they're measuring on a very small scale because those guys are able to put it where they want. Again, the umpires in the big leagues are incredible. And it's something I try to tell guys too. I'm like, ever since we've had instant replay, like I've got the utmost respect for umpires because there's not a lot of calls that are overturned. It's like it's a bang bang play at first, and I'm like, oh, he was totally safe, and he called him out. And then you look at the replay, and I swear, maybe I don't watch enough baseball, but like I swear it's like 75, 80% of the time the guy was right. And to
Yeah.
me, in a game that's so fast, I mean, I think it's incredible. And I think balls and strikes are the same way. And I think, you know, I think because we have more metrics, I think there's a little less in terms of now that the umpires are graded a certain way, there's also a little less of the idea that, okay, when, you know, Mike Trout is up, you know, his strike zone is different than, you know, rookie,
Yeah.
because the umpire is still getting graded the exact same whether Mike Trout's up or the rookie, where, you know, again, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the strike zones were 100% different for each hitter. So I think that's kind of, you know, cleaned up a lot of that. But those guys are good, man. Umpires in the big leagues are freaking good. And so when you're talking about what advantage you're getting, I mean, you're talking about very small measurements in terms of what you're getting. And at the high school level, you can kind of be fooled by going, oh, I got like 3 pitches like this far off the plate. It's like, well, you know, you probably could have done anything and that
Yeah.
umpire was going to call that pitch a strike, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just different measurables. But I agree. I think that's a great point. You know, we really don't have, you know, the metrics to really understand what works and what don't. That's why I more want guys to go, hey, what percentage of balls do you think the ball kind of manipulated you as opposed to you manipulating the ball? And have them understand it a little more on that level. Well, I kind of did feel there was like a couple breaking balls I got on the top of, kind of dipped my glove down and I had
Mhm.
to yank it back up. And, you know, just like, again, I relate it to everything else in the game. But, you know, hey, I went 1 for 4, but I hit 3 balls right on the screws, right? Or, hey, I went 4 for 4 and I didn't square 1 ball up today. So I'm pumped I got 4 hits, but I'm not exactly where I need to be right now. And we want them to just kind of think a little bit differently in that regard of evaluating themselves.
Man, excellent point right there. And one thing I'm big on, whether it be, you know, throwing or receiving or lifting weights or your relationships or whatever, it's just like self-awareness. And I think that's one thing that, you know, you have to learn. You know, I think when you grow up, you have blinders on. You don't, it's hard for you to understand an outside perspective. So what you're talking about is asking guys to have enough self-awareness to really be able to say, like, yeah, I didn't catch that ball as well as I could have, because I think that's one area where catchers have struggled for a long time. You know, they think because they caught it, they did a good job, and if it goes to the backstop, they did a bad job. You know, when in
Mm-hmm.
reality, there's a lot of gray area in the middle. You know, just because you catch it does not mean that you caught it correctly. There's a lot of, you know, wrong ways or
Mm-hmm.
poor ways to catch it. So, um, you know, creating that awareness is very important. I'd like to hear where you think that comes from. I've got an idea, but what do you think can kind of help a player, you know, kind of create some of that awareness so that they can understand, like, man, I did catch that ball well, or yeah, I didn't really get that one like I should have.
I mean, that comes in the preparation of really kind of being on them to be as big on evaluating themselves in practice as they are in the game. So if they're, you know, we have classes and we got, you know, multiple machines in there and we've got a, you know, sinker going on one and a little like kind of cut slider going on the other to really test, you know, their angles and where they are in strength. And I need them to really understand when they didn't get one, what's the adjustment. I mean, we talk about big leaguers all the time. We're in the Bay Area. I am like, you know, the biggest Buster Posey fan that you could imagine, just because I think, you know, again, before all of this got really big, he was doing such a great job in terms of how he controlled his pocket and got so many strikes on simplicity more than movement.
Hmm.
And I think that, you know, I tell these guys, like, I'm watching a game and there's a pitcher in there throwing 95-mile-an-hour sinkers. And I see Buster Posey get beat. And then the next pitch, his glove's on the ground because he knows he's got to make an adjustment to work back up. So I want to see him visually make adjustments in practice too. If they get blown up on one, I want them to know what adjustment they need to make and how do they do it, because it's just like anything else. I can't just have the same exact approach and expect to do better this time. So
Yeah.
we really, I mean, I'm most of the time I'm right down there in a crouch. You know, I got 2 guys on either side in the class, or obviously if it's a one-on-one, I'm right there with the one guy. But you know, we're really evaluating on a pitch by pitch basis so that they understand. Like, and I'll ask them, "Hey, how did you feel on that one?" I feel like I got a little beat. Okay, you know, there's cues on us, the sound of it, right? I mean, we know that if we square it up and we're in a good position, we're going to hear that pop. And if I'm there and I don't hear a guy, if I'm looking this way and I got a catcher behind me and I don't hear him, I'm gonna immediately turn around and be like, dude, I'm not hearing anything. So we got to do something a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
So just understanding the cues and things that we know make us successful. But we gotta prepare a certain way. If I don't have an idea of what I'm doing in practice, I'm not gonna have any idea of what I'm doing in the game.
Yeah, I like that, and I would kind of echo what you said. I would have said it a little bit differently, but I would have said the same thing. That's why I like having these conversations. Is I think it comes down to coaching. I mean, I think it's the coach's job to help them gain self awareness by being a great communicator, by being in their ear all the time, and not just complaining when they do things poorly, but also patting them on the back when they do things well. I think that's the only way for them to really know is when you're working with them, whether it be a college setting and you got 3 or 4 guys, or it's a bullpen setting and you're with one guy, or a private lesson or whatever it is. You got to communicate with guys and let them know, hey man, that was really good right there. It looks better. Did you feel that? What that one feel like to you? Ask questions, get them to speak, get them to kind of verbalize it.
That's
Um,
huge. That's huge. I think, to really kind of stop you there and echo that point is getting them to say it. I think way too much time as coaches, we think we have so much information that we just want to throw it on to the kids as much as we can. And there's so many times when a guy receives a pitch poorly and I'll, stop the guy feeding the machine. I'll be like, hang on a second. And I'll say, what happened right there? And they say, well, I think I got a little extended, which got me a little over the ball. Beautiful. Okay, good. Because I don't want to have to tell him every time. If I'm telling him every time, I'm not sitting there with a headset in his ear during a game, like the quarterback in football, where I'm going to be able to tell him everything that's going on. I think they need to be able to verbalize it. And we as coaches need to be able to step back and really hear them on what they're feeling and what they're doing. Because I just see it a lot. And that's why I really, apologize. I interrupt you there. I just wanted to
Not at all.
really, really hammer that home, because I think as coaches, we do sometimes, just want to tell everybody everything that we know, which is, again, that's not a negative thing. It's just, they have to learn. We have to know that they're hearing what we're saying by getting them to say it back to us. And just too many times it's, no, you did this on that one. No, you did this on that one. It's like, no, hey, what did you feel there? I felt like I was all right. Okay, well, let me tell you what I think, and sometimes they're gonna be like, hey, I felt this, this, and this. And you're gonna be like, exactly right. What's the adjustment? Have them verbalize what the adjustment's going to be, and then make them do it. And I think that's just so important, is just really that back and forth of getting them to speak about what they're feeling and doing.
I like that, man. And so that's actually one thing that I spoke about at CatcherCon this past year. One of the things that I used to have my catchers do is I would have them write a report. It sounds like I give them homework, but I would literally give them homework like, hey, the first week of practice, we're going to talk about our stances. Okay, well, you have to literally write me a report, type it, write it, do whatever. I want you to teach me what you know about our stances. And again, you do it for a bunch of different topics, or it can be a more specific topic, or maybe the more specific topic, the higher you go or the deeper you're getting with the guy. But to hear how a player communicates back with you, whether it be through the spoken word or the written word, I think is big, because it also allows you to understand what verbiage they use and which ways they like to communicate. So
Awesome.
that's one
Awesome.
thing that I like to do. And that's just one way to do it. Have a guy write a report. But I think just having that open line of communication where you're getting them to talk, I think as a coach, one of the most important jobs you have is just asking questions and trying to get them to gain that awareness like we're talking about. So
I
I
really
can.
like the write it down thing though too, because you're also not throwing them on the spot, which is difficult for some guys too, right? Because you want them to think about what they're doing, but you say, hey, what'd you do there? Some kids, that's not the best way for them to learn, to kind of be thrown on the spot, where they can go home, write down their thoughts. You can know that they're thinking the right things, and then kind of reiterate it. And then we know that it's getting ingrained. And I mean, that's just right now, I'm just learning that. I think that's a really cool thing, because, we talk about writing a bunch of stuff down in terms of goals, in terms of time and priority management. What are you going to do to get better this week? Write it down. Let's make yourself accountable. But I like the idea of writing stuff down in terms of what we're talking about too, so that they kind of have a little time to say, okay, cool, I can take 20, 30 minutes and really think about what we did today, and really, analyze it and write it down. That's awesome, man. I like that.
Well, one of the things that I liked about it is it allowed me to, like I said, see how the player thought. So, like I said, as coaches, a lot of times we think one way. We're reading all the same tweets, we're seeing the same videos, or watching, and we may think one thing. So, let's say you and I are talking, and I keep talking about my glove hand versus my throwing hand. Well, when I talk to my player, he might say his left hand versus his right hand, and it's the same thing, but it's different ways to communicate. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
if you understand that, hey, when I'm talking to Brett, he says left hand, I need to use those words so that it kind of hits home with him and kind of, rings true. So, um,
So cool.
but
So cool.
but I think it's just it's communication. You know what I mean? It's getting
Mm-hmm.
deeper than just hey, how's your day going? I think if you can learn how, like you said earlier, how guys like to learn, guys learn differently. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have the number of guys like you do, there's different learners in there. I remember when I was still coaching in college, I had some guys, I hate to say it, I wouldn't name any names, like it was almost embarrassing the reports they would write, like the way that you could just tell they didn't write they weren't very good at communicating their thoughts. So I thought it was a great exercise for them because they really had to put some effort into it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're a little bit different academically, or they have a different, history and academics or whatever it is. But, making guys, come up with their thought process, they feel like they thought about it themselves, and, you can learn a lot from it. So I know that's we kind of made a short question, a long answer. But that's one of
No,
the
but
things that I believe
that
in.
communication is just huge, and I think the communication that goes past baseball is so important. And I think it's easier when I'm coaching in college and I got 3-4 catchers. It's like I'll take a guy to lunch, not even talk about baseball, easy enough. Right now we got so many guys, and on a given day I could have 12 or 15 catchers run through there, and it's like I got to take time every time to make sure I check in with them on what's going on. So like I always just do bare hand drills to start. I'm bouncing balls, bare hands. And the reality is it's a great warm up, but I'm talking to them during that one. What happened this week in school? What'd you do? Things like that. We got a great instructor at our facility that does hitting. And he says, first time he gets a guy, says, here's the deal. Number one, you got to ask me a question, if you don't understand something. That's the biggest thing that's important. He goes, secondly, you got to tell me what you ate for lunch every single day. And so he's asking every guy what he ate for lunch every day. It sounds really dumb, but it's like he's learning about that kid just based on,
Yeah.
next time he comes in, he goes, hey, did you go PB&J again today?
Yeah.
And you build that relationship and that trust. And those kind of things that seem a little stupid, kind of on that communication level, are so important because, again, it just always goes back to, listening to Ken Ravizza, people got to know you care before they care what you know. And
Mhm.
realistically, I think we all got into this for the sake of relationships. And sometimes we kind of get stray with the idea of where am I going with my career? And maybe I leave that in the background, or, maybe I'm concerned about how many lessons I do to make sure I make
Yeah.
X amount of money, and I kind of lose that. And that's not a negative, like, we're all humans. We
It's
all got
human. Yeah. It's human.
bills to pay. We got mortgages, and we got car payments, and we got, wives and kids. I mean, there's a whole deal to it, right? So it's not a selfish thing. It's just we do need to kind of check ourselves too and say, hey, I need to check in with this kid on life, what's going on, and maybe take some time to, text your guys during the week and remember they had a game and say, hey, how'd it go today? And those things go a long way. And really, we may be doing it for their benefit, but we're really doing it for our benefit because that's what we love, is those relationships with the guys.
For sure, man. No doubt. I see. I love talking about stuff like that. Don't get me wrong. I love talking about the mechanical aspects and the stuff we spoke about earlier. But I like the coaching side, and I don't know if it's psychology, so to speak, but it's learning how guys work and what makes guys tick and building those relationships. So I enjoy that. But I do want to get back
I'm
to.
with you.
But I want to get back to some X and O stuff for a minute. A minute ago, you talked about you always start off with the bare hand drill. I'd love to, every time I talk to a guy, I feel like there's a million different ways to do a drill, and there's different variations of each drill. If I had to put you on the spot and say, we've mostly spoken about receiving tonight. This is kind of where the conversation's gone. If I
Mm-hmm.
had to say, hey, what are your 3 or 4, drills that, what are your go-to drills? And then what might be a drill or 2 drills that somebody can learn that maybe hasn't done before, maybe something a little unique that, man, I bet I've never done that before. I'm gonna try that with my guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm just so big on hands and hand skill. Again, I think we kind of get this position. We talk about kind of 20, 25 years ago, it was pegged as something different when it's really not. Infielders are so big on how their hands work and allow your feet to get into a position to let your hands work.
Mm-hmm.
And so hand skill, we really focus on patience. So like when we're doing bare hand drills, I always like to bounce the ball just because they don't know where the ball's going to be until it's halfway there because it's bouncing, right? So they have to wait until the ball's halfway there to bounce it. And then at the end, I throw some straight in the air and trying to get them to feel that same timing and rhythm as we do that drill. And that goes for the same thing as we go for transfers. So it's really important for us that all those key things we talk about, getting below the ball, our relationship with our wrist and our elbow, letting the ball get deep. When we say, hey, here's the deal, we want to transfer that ball right in the center of our body. Well, how do I get that ball consistently to the center of my body? I got to focus on all those same things. So we talk about all the angles that we want that pocket to be to receive. All those same angles allow us to manipulate that ball to the middle. So, I mean, I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary, but it's really important for us that we progress from the receiving to the transfers. And that's just isolating the upper body, whether it's on our knees or standing up. And we're just simply focused on getting it to the middle and then separating it as quickly as we can. A lot of times guys will get it to the middle and they want to drag everything up. We really want them to force, we call it the magnet drill because, again, Tony would talk about how, you get it here and then you want to feel like your hands are like, polar opposite magnets that like are pushing against each other.
Mm-hmm.
So we really want to feel that separation happen in front of us as early as we can. Again, a drill where we really want to communicate to them and have them understand that's not the way it's going to be when we throw. But if we can feel that, when we get to here, I'm going to feel my hands separate. Because overall, the philosophy on throwing is how do I get into position to throw before my left foot hits the ground? Shortstop is trying to field a ball. How is he in a spot where he can have his hands, arms in a position to throw the ball when his left foot hits the ground? So it's really a matter of, continuing to reinforce hand skills. So I don't really, I hate to say it, I don't really have any kind of like, gimmicky sort of thing in terms of drills because for me, it's really the idea of doing something over and over and over and over again. And that's why it's like, I've had trouble with guys, online, they'll write me or whatever, and like, hey, while I'm in quarantine, what's some drills I can do? It's like, drills to do. You just don't want to continue to do the same drills over and over again. You're like kind of stuck in what you're doing. But the reality is this is the best time for you to learn how to do the same thing over and over and over again and create a routine. So I don't think I really answered the question, but I think the reinforcement on really hand skill and what we're doing with our hands and that progression from receiving to our transfer. But yeah, I mean, I guess, some sort of kind of like fun or gimmicky things, we obviously like to have guys walk to the machine, which I think a lot of guys do. And that's something that really reinforces that idea of relaxing and seeing the ball as early as we can, relax, trust yourself a little bit. So we like to do some stuff like that. But, like I said, everything we do is a lot of the same stuff. And that's something that kind of goes into that process of, what we're doing. And when we have a class going and we're working on receiving, we might have certain, drills we're doing at each station. But we're also going to be totally individualized where it's like, we got the slider here and, I need one guy to slide and work to the outside where another guy might not need to do that. So I don't want to kind of keyhole them.
Yeah.
But again, I guess I sound really boring with that answer. But
no, well, I'm kind of the same way, to be honest. And, you see, I feel like a lot of times this is the hitting world, pitching world, whatever, catching world. A lot of times you see I hate to call them crazy drills, but the different drills, the non-traditional drills, new drills, whatever you want to call them. Those are the ones that people seem to gravitate towards because they're different. They're polar. Mostly I stick to pretty basic drills. I'd say over the past couple of years, I've maybe started to implement some more, hate to say I'm implementing more gimmicky drills, but I understand that a lot of players like to try new things. So I'm trying to try new things with them, simply because I want the learning experience to be good for them. But for the most part, 80% of the drill work is going to be, I hate to call it bland, but it's going to be pretty bland. It's going to be working on one specific aspect of a specific movement, whether it be, throwing, blocking, receiving, whatever. But it's not going to be the sexiest thing out there. And then I try to throw a couple of sexy drills at them just to keep them on their toes and keep them having fun. But the majority of the work is going to be, the boring stuff, so to speak.
I think sometimes as coaches, we feel we need those kind of gimmicky drills to sell the kid on something to kind of keep their interest. But the reality is we have to take the time to really sell them on the process and a little bit of that kind of boring aspect of repeatability and doing something over and over again. And I think there's a time for it, right? I mean, obviously I got guys that are 9 years old and we got to, do some stuff that makes it fun for them and, gets them to understand concepts a little bit easier. But, the reality is that the older they get, if we're not trying to convince them on the process of how things go, we're really failing them in a regard of needing something that, gets them to laugh and have a good time. I'm not trying to sound like a drill sergeant, and we obviously have a great time when we're in there. But, I think that it's not just our job to teach them how to catch. It's our job to teach them, a process and a work ethic and everything that goes with that. So, at the end of the day, if, a catcher comes and, he does 5 lessons with me and he's like, this is kind of boring, then maybe I'm not the right guy, and that's totally fine. I think there's other guys out there and they might respond differently, but for me, I think, it's more the idea of really ingraining those processes. And so a lot of times that's not fun.
Yeah.
The guys that do think it's fun, those are guys like I was when I played. I mean, you could have, even to this day, every time I go to the facility, if I'm there 20 minutes early, I'm turning the machine on and I'm going to receive a bunch because I still love doing that.
Yeah.
So it's just the idea of, those are the kind of guys that really gravitate towards me, the ones that really want to continue to do it and do the same thing and come to class with an idea of, hey, like 3 weeks ago, we worked a little bit on this. Can we kind of build off of that? Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you came in here and you really, had an idea of what you wanted to do. That's amazing. And it's not just, hey, can we do the, stick drill? It's, can we stick to a process of what we're trying to do? And that's what makes it fun.
For sure, man. Well, Brett, man, I'll be honest. I really enjoyed our conversation tonight. We've been going for a little over an hour, so I feel like if we wanted to, we could make this a marathon and keep going well into the night. But we're going to cut it off here, and maybe we can resume it at some other time. But definitely enjoyed it, man. It was nice to kind of get to know a little bit more about you and learn your the way you teach and what you're doing over the Catching Academy. And I like the way you present information, and I learned a few new things as well too. So. Enjoyed it, man. Glad to have you on. I'll put your information below so people can get in touch with you. But do you have anything coming up that people should know about?
No, I mean, we're kind of all stuck inside. So, really, again, it's kind of been good timing that we've been able to launch this Catching Academy Network on our YouTube channel while people are at home and getting some information. So I encourage guys, we'll have some more videos coming out with the next couple of weeks with some other guys. So check that out. Again, it's just our YouTube channel, Catching Academy Network. We're on all social media at Catching Academy with everything. I just started a TikTok. I'm trying to be cool like the young kids. So you can catch us on TikTok if that's what you're doing. But I really appreciate you having me. Every year CatcherCon is the same weekend as our camp. We run our camp in December. And because we've dealt with a couple of weather issues the last couple of years, I want to try to move it up, hopefully willing with everything that's going on in the world. But I'm super excited to come out this year and hang out with everybody and get a little deeper. And maybe we can bring my film guy out and get some stuff for the Catching Academy Network with some of you guys too.
For sure, man. I tell you, it really is a fun weekend. There's definitely a lot of learning that goes on. I mean, everybody that presents does a fantastic job and takes a ton of pride in it. And you learn something new from every speaker, but at the same time, you're also around, all the guys who are, last year we came up with the term catching psychopaths. You're around all the catching psychopaths, the people who are just infatuated with it. So it's cool networking opportunity too. Just where you get to meet people who are, excited about the same thing that we are.
Totally.
So
Totally.
yeah, definitely, man. Love to see you out there, but man, keep doing good stuff out there. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks again, man. I appreciate you having me.